Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Why can some ghosts of the same person be seen in different places at the same time? Are dowsing and other, quote, divination activities as dangerous as Ouija boards? What is the Wendigo?
Hello, and welcome to the 950th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you from WOON AM and FM radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live, on YouTube, and via TuneIn.com. I'm Ben, and those surprising questions came from my co-host, partner in Paranormal Adventures, and dad, Paul. And today we welcome back a distinguished friend and one of our regular guest co-hosts.
Co-hosting with us today via Skype is Tim R. Swartz. Tim is an Emmy Award-winning television producer and videographer and is the author of a number of popular books. A well-known broadcaster, Tim has investigated unexplained phenomena all over the world, has appeared widely in the media, and we're honored to call him a friend.
Oh, so Tim Schwartz, welcome back to Behind the Paranormal.
Hey, thanks, guys. It's always a real pleasure being with you.
No, it's always fun to have you with us. You always offer such an interesting perspective.
He's seen a lot, this guy has.
That's true, and I guess we should just hop right into it then.
Yeah, let's get started.
Yes.
No, that's the script bit.
You handed me the wrong thing. Or maybe I just grabbed the wrong thing.
You just grabbed the wrong thing.
Hey, you know, I'm a little eager. I'm ready to get into it, is sort of the thing. So I guess we'll hop into this question from Pam in Cumberland, Rhode Island, right here in our listening area. I'm really amazed by so much that I hear on your show, but one thing I would really like to hear more about is ghosts different people see in different places at the same time. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, well, I'm the one who brought that up in the first place. So, yeah, it's difficult, of course, to tell that because that could be happening, but you have to have people report the sightings and they have to jive, okay?
Right.
And that's not easy. I have 3 cases of that from over the years, one from the 70s and 2 from the 80s. And they all involved large families who had lost someone. And relatives, of course, will sometimes have experiences of loved ones, whether they like the loved one or not, which is something I always think about. But in this case, the families, several members of the families in relatively widely separated places had seen the person who had, quote unquote, died, or translated as we say, at the same time, the same point in the evening, doing different things. All these sightings were, actually about half of them were, I should say 2 were interactive, in the sense that the person was, the quote-unquote ghost was apparently aware of the people who were observing him. And in the third case, it was a woman who just seemed like she was going about her day, doing different things, and then 2 people were seeing her at the same time. In my opinion, this is our dear old multiverse at work. Where there are many worlds in which the person never translated, and being connected in many ways with the members of the family, they would see the person at the same time. But again, this could happen every day, but we don't know about it because people wouldn't report it, and it's the sort of thing they wouldn't talk about in many cases. So I don't know. Tim, have you ever run into that kind of thing?
Oh, I've like you. I mean, I've heard stories. The thing about it is it's really hard to get the times right. You know, if somebody says, "Oh, well, I saw great Grandma Myrtle, who she appeared at my bedside at 10 o'clock," and so I say, "Oh yeah, well, it was 10 o'clock that I saw her as well." I mean, it's really hard to determine if it was actually 10 o'clock or, 5 after 10 or, 5 before 10 o'clock. So, I really haven't heard any accounts that, you could really be definitive that, yeah, this all happened exactly at 10 o'clock, say. Not to say that it probably couldn't happen because, I mean, I think that we probably, our universe is timeless, that, our perception of time, past, present, and future is just because of our physical condition, and that, so, for anything that is outside of our time-space continuum, if they're able to do so, they could have probably appear anytime they wanted to anyone, any place. But I'm like you, Paul. I mean, you also have to consider this, the multiverse theory that we exist in an infinite number of universes. And so, I mean, yes, somebody who is, say, like grieving, has strong emotions going on, that, that opens up your perceptions to be able to see past the veil, especially when it concerns a loved one that you've been very close to. So, yeah, I mean, you could have several people at the same time seeing, looking into these windows, so to speak, into some of these multiple timelines where the person is still alive, especially in the ones that are probably closest to us, because those are the ones that, my theory would be the most similar to our own present timeline.
Thoughts, Ben?
Sure. Oh, geez, excuse me. I think it's it's kind of interesting. I've been kind of into phenomenology recently, the study of the human experience, and one sort of thing that always really fascinates me is there's this sort of very general common denominator between most paranormal phenomena of sort of the, I guess I'm going to borrow a term from parapsychology, but change it a little bit, the observer, right? We're gonna take that, we're gonna flip it a bit. So the general idea is that somebody observes a phenomena, and typically there would be someone who would be precipitating it, whether with emotions, whatever. But I think it's more of we're all sort of the observer, and we're all sort of precipitating it in some way, shape, or form, right? So why is it that ghost hunters, quote unquote, go into, let's say, an abandoned asylum, because that's a fun cliche, and they all experience something different, right? It's they're all in the same room, but they all have these common denominators of, okay, well, the temperature changed, blah 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 blah, and we have stories of a woman in white seen running down the halls and crying, and a story of a kid playing with a toy airplane in a different room or whatever. But it's like they all experience different things, and it's never necessarily the same thing. It's just kind of these sort of stories that we've sort of taken and tried to place a phenomena into a pattern of, right? So we have these set patterns that we like to, or well, instead of patterns, we like stories. We'll put it this way: we like ghost stories. So we like to have a ghost story with a structure, and we want to structure and order the reality to fit this particular story. So let's say, grandma, passes away, her funeral was a few weeks ago, and then somebody sees grandma, a few months later, sitting in her favorite chair. And here's the question, is it grandma? It could be. There's a possibility that it's grandma. And, there could be a parallel world in which grandma's existing and doing the same thing that she's doing, but we have a story in our head. And the story is grandma's dead. And grandma is here, and she has a message for us. And it's like, well, grandma could just be knitting, right, in a different world. But we like to have these stories, and we like to have the phenomena fit whatever narrative we walk into it with. Now, let's say, grandma dies, and then you see a little girl in white, right? Okay, well, that's grandma's a little girl, and she's running around, and she's doing her thing. Maybe it's not grandma. Maybe it's a parasite. Maybe it's a completely different creature that we don't know about. But here's the thing. We have stories. We all have a story we try to fit this phenomena into, and we can't quite do it. But we all have a different story we want to tell, right? So hence why my dad and I will walk into a case, and they'll have a medium in there, say, well, there's a tortured soul that we had to get them to the other side, whatever the other side is, right? Or the other side of what? Who knows? And we'll never know, because we like vague terms that fit our narrative. You know, it's like humans, depending on whatever the subject is, we like to have a narrative and we like to have things fit that narrative. It doesn't matter what the subject is, right? Whether it's politics, history, whatever. We have a narrative and we want to make it fit. And in the paranormal, it's no different. You know, we have a narrative, we want to make it fit. It's probably why we're not welcome at most ghost events, because we have a narrative that doesn't fit.
No.
And so
we're bad for business.
We are bad for business, but we have a different narrative. And so here's the thing. There's something happening, and we all have a different narrative we're trying to fit it into. Whether it's grandma that passed away a few weeks ago, whether it's a parasite, whether it's something completely different. Maybe it's a different lady entirely, just living a different life that happens to look like grandma. We don't know. And so the fun thing is, we're all experiencing these events that humans have experienced forever. And our story has changed, but the phenomena hasn't.
Right. Well, just the context of it, before we go to another subject, the context of this, 1978 was the first time I heard of this. And by the end of the 70s, I was really confused. I'd been through the poltergeist case in Bridgeport, the exorcisms when I was in the seminary, all this different stuff that didn't fit the old ideas, in my opinion. We had to come up with new theories. So I started hearing about this, and it was, in me, more arrows in the quiver of the idea that we had to sort of update our ideas about the paranormal. Now, one little twist, and I'd like to get to Tim's view on this too, Pam might be interested in hearing, was right here in Rhode Island, down on Prudence Island. Now, Narragansett Bay is full of little islands, all of them named after Roger Williams' daughters, okay, the founder of Providence. And Prudence was one of them. So, and I was going over there. Matter of fact, your mother and I, Ben, were going over to, I was going to lecture there, this is some years ago. And they said it was the first, we were late. It was the first time they'd held the ferry in 30 years. So I was complimented with that.
That's
but over there, I ran into a case that involved somebody who, the ghost, quote unquote, someone who hadn't died yet. And to me, that's something that's kind of related to this in a way. In this house, there was a woman clearly cooking at a fireplace at one time. It's a long story. And then upstairs was a man who had was in very bad shape, very unhappy, a big mess. Turns out it was the guy, he was in prison, perfectly, living, quote unquote, with breathing and everything. And I thought that was interesting too. So there are all sorts of variations on a theme here. So we seem to have a caller.
We do, and it is Cousin Rick.
Oh, Cousin Rick Eno, one of our special co-hosts and our Northern California reporter. Hello, Rick. Welcome to WON.
Thank you, Paul. It's good to hear your and Ben's voice. I always look forward to hearing that on a Sunday.
Well, allergies or not, I guess I can talk.
Yes, the dulcet tones of the Eno voice.
Yes, how many Enos can there be? All right. So we're here with Tim Swartz, who is filling in
Tim.
for us.
Hi, good to talk to you.
Good to have you this morning.
So what do you have for us from Lotus Land?
Yeah, no kidding. So I'm going to, I've noticed a trend. So I'm going to actually include briefly two cases that I reported on before just to give a context, and then go into why I'm seeing a trend. So the case that I've reported on prior on the show was one where there was it was last year in October on the 30th, and what happened was a person was sitting in their backyard. Basically, they saw this craft go overhead. It had a certain light arrangement. It had no sound. It had no wings. And it was moving 200 to 300 miles an hour, so at a low level. So I'm going to leave that one there because I've talked about it before, but I want to go forward to the next case, which was about January 15th of 2022, when a gentleman was in his yard with his dog, and he witnessed what seemed to be somewhat of a saucer-like craft with a distinct light pattern, that whenever it would move, the light pattern would light up in a certain sequence, and then it would move forward. And then when it left, it had another distinct light pattern, and it shot straight up and disappeared, leaving a cloud behind. So these crafts that I'm seeing have some unique features. So we're seeing an increase in crafts as opposed to orbs or anything else, at least in the cases that I'm doing. I don't want to generalize to everybody. So this next case, it comes to me, it happened on March 10th, and the person was on their back patio, and they witnessed a circular object hovering in the distance. And what they witnessed was that circular object ejected another circular object from it, and they were side by side. And then began moving, I believe, in a southeast pattern towards what I believe would be Sacramento. So there's this other case where we're seeing the object. That same case, she went out to look around the neighborhood, and she saw two other similarly glowing circular objects flying a distinct pattern, again towards Sacramento. And as it broke off into the distance, 3 helicopters were pursuing it. And so again, what I'm seeing here is, okay, we're seeing these repetitive crafts. I'm getting them every so often. And then finally, and this is the case I'm currently working on, so I can only reveal certain things about it, but it happened in Monterey County, which isn't that far away logistically from these other cases. And a gentleman was with his daughter, and they had stopped along the highway, and all of a sudden it started getting really warm in the car. It was about, I'd say it was, the ambient temperature outside was in the 50s, but it was getting to be 80 degrees, and they couldn't figure out why. They looked over, they saw this craft with like a sheen of a window and about 6 figures inside it, and they stared at it for about 10 seconds, and then it took off rapidly, and when it did, the temperature dropped back down to the ambient 52 degrees. So what I'm seeing in the cases I'm getting is all reports of craft doing unique things, as opposed to what I sometimes get, which is, I get beings reported or entities reported or voices and things like that. I'm seeing a lot more uptake in the actual physical craft. So I'm working on figuring that one out.
Well, Tim is a major theological figure in the UFO community, so I'm going to only throw that right in his lap. Tim, what say you?
Yeah.
Well, it's always nice to see reports of what appeared to be actual physical craft. I mean, it seems like that for quite a while, people have been seeing, orbs or just little bright dots in the sky. So, when you have a craft that has a very distinctive light pattern to it, it's always nice to hear these reports. It's especially nice to hear ones where people are actually observing, say, like you said, the one where it had a window with they could see, like, beams, peering out. It seems like reports like this have really fallen to the wayside. I don't know if people have just become reluctant to report them, or if actually there just hasn't been a lot of cases like that. But it's just it's always a pleasure to hear these. And once again, I always need to like to point out with these craft that like your first report that has distinctive light patterns. Why do they have distinctive light patterns? It seems to me that, if you are dealing, and I'm just putting that out there, with physical, say, spaceships, why the bright lights? I mean, if you've got a spaceship that's coming from, say, like another solar system, you'd think they would have the technology to not have Christmas lights all over the craft.
That's a really good point.
Standing out for everybody to see. It's very much like these things are wanting to be seen. Why else are you flying at a low pattern with very bright lights on, just screaming, "I'm here, look at it, look at me." Which, maybe why that we've been seeing more just, little orbs and barely distinguishable in the night sky lights, that sort of thing. It got to the point now where everybody has a cell phone camera, possibly, probably, not the best cameras in the world, but still everybody, if they have a mind to it, can snap a picture. Maybe whatever is behind these things, the UAPs, it's finally gotten through their heads that, hey, maybe we can't be flying around with very distinctive metallic-looking craft because someone's going to get a good picture of us someday. And there have been good pictures, but a lot of them have been ignored.
Yeah, of course. This is very interesting. Ben, thoughts?
That is, Tim, that is an incredibly good point that I've never really realized, because if it's, you'd think it'd be like an Independence Day scenario where they wouldn't really need landing lights. They'd just kind of communicate via the ship, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would
exactly.
So it lends more to the question. Honestly, it just adds more questions to it, because it's like, okay, well, you have this craft, and is it one of ours? And I'm trying to remember who we were talking to a few weeks ago. It's on the tip of my tongue.
You mean a guest?
Yes.
Well,
we were talking about UFO history throughout time, and I asked him. I'll look it up real fast when I get a chance.
I think we remember our own guest, but after going on 15 years.
Well, this is show number 950. So
the old memory banks.
That is a good point, and we talk about so many topics, and it's hard to be well versed in everything all the time. Anyway, the point being is, well, how do we know it's not one of ours, right? If we're constantly developing technology, and the government is at the very least, we'll say the military. The military is at the very least 10 to 15 years ahead of us, at all times, and it's before we get sort of stuff leaked into the public. It's an interesting thing to think about. Why are we seeing more craft in the first place? Is it a distraction? There's so many horrible things going on in the world right now and there's so many things that are trying to distract us from the actual problems and solutions, that it's like, why wouldn't this be another distraction, right? Why are we hearing suddenly more about quote unquote disclosure, other than it being a possible distraction, let's just change the name of unidentified flying objects into, UAPs, right? Unidentified aerial phenomena, right? Which now it kind of occurs to me that instead of ufology, it'd be you-apology, right? And maybe it's a tongue-in-cheek joke. I don't know, right? And so it's another thing where there's so many more questions that are asked, and it makes me wonder: is it time for or are we sort of on the verge of the quote-unquote paradigm shift? Are we sort of getting to a point where our narrative just isn't really working anymore? And are we getting to a point where it's like, okay, well, now we're sort of having the government cater to us in some way, shape, or form. Is that a good thing? Or is it a bad thing? We don't know. And now we're trying to discover. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you trying to say something, Father?
Oh no, I think you might have been thinking of Michael Stratt on May 8th.
I was thinking of Michael Stratt.
Yeah,
yes.
With the obscure and little-known UFO cases like the Michelin Man and all.
Yes, and I posed the question to him because he was talking about the possibility of it being a military or originating from us, and I was like, well, how much of the time would you say that any of these UFO sightings would be one of ours, quote unquote? And he was like, like 90% of the time. And I was like, really? And he's like, oh yeah. He's like, that's what I found anyway. Is that it might be one of ours? And I was like, that's interesting. It's fun to think about. It might be true, but we don't know.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is we don't really know. And so now we're getting to a point where, okay, well, we're getting distracted by all of these things, but what's the overarching message? Why are we seeing more of them? And is it because there's something big that's going to happen, right? Kind of like a Mothman scenario.
Well, what's interesting to me, and maybe Rick would want to comment on this, is that over the history of our show and before that, for about the last 30 years, it seemed to go from nuts and bolts craft in sightings to more ethereal or spiritual phenomena such as balls of light. And I'm thinking of our old friend, the late Ted Phillips,
yes,
who was on many times, and I think this was the last interview he ever did. I probably shouldn't tell you fellas this, but people have a tendency to keel over every time, whenever they've been on this show. It's the last interview done by people of the caliber of Jesse Marcel Jr., et cetera. So Tim's got a look on his face like he's a little bit doubtful. I don't blame him.
Last known vocal recordings.
But co-hosts are exempt. So you fellas are both co-hosts. So. All right. So anyway, Ted said that some years ago when he was on, that the phenomena seemed to have been shifting from the nuts and bolts craft to more of these spiritual or ethereal or hard to put your finger on, non kind of mechanical things. And now the indication is it could be shifting back. So we'll leave that thought there while we take our mid-show break. You're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM, 99.5 FM in New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley. Be right back with our two great co-hosts. So stick with us.
The night is alive. Join us and take a walk on the weird side when you tune in to The Kingdom of Nye, hosted by Heather Wade, the finest in late night talk. Listen live free weeknights starting at 9 p.m. Pacific time at thekingdomofnye.com, talkstreamlive.com, and the Paranormal Radio app. Wanna take a ride? The night is alive. Join us.
Local and live at 99.5.
Okay. Welcome back to Behind the Paranormal here on WOON Radio, AM and FM. And we are talking today we have our great guest co-host today, Tim Swartz. We have an open line show to answer your questions. And we have Rick, our Northern California reporter, calling in regarding UFOs. We talked about the nature of bilocating ghosts, and we've talked so far, too, about the nature of UFOs.
Which is zipping through topics.
Exactly. So, Rick, did you want to comment on further on these cases?
Yeah, I think a couple things. To me, what you're just speaking about, the sort of a spiritual or dimensional connection, these seem to be more of the nuts and bolts nature, meaning these crafts. The one unique thing I can say about all these cases is they did something unique that the others didn't do in each case, like one that literally disappeared, like gone. And then this one with the temperature change. And you got to wonder, was that a result of being close to a craft and it giving off radiation or heat, or are they being scanned? But what is unique is that they all did something different, but they all seem to be physical crafts. Maybe from another dimension, maybe from that, but definitely solid structured vehicles under control of intelligent control. So where these are going to go, I don't know, but I do know this. All these cases are not far from Moffett Field in Lockheed. So that point about the military craft that Ben was making, I mean, I see a lot of weird things out here. I'm sure if I went down to the desert there in Southern California, I'd see even more weird things. And what's making me think of that is the Space Force is tuning up, and they actually have a literal Space Force. They have people in it. I've got to believe they didn't start that with zero crafts and zero technology to do that, because what would be the point? I don't think they would be operating, in my opinion, off of trying to get a Saturn rocket into the atmosphere to get people up there. I do think they are full ahead, as Ben said, about 15 years to 20 years ahead of us, and they are using these anti-gravitational vehicles. And that's my best guess. I would lean towards that side of it. It's some type of military or black ops craft that they've developed.
Okay, well, there you have it. Well, Rick, thank you for calling in. I have another favor to hit you with for next week. I'll be in touch off the air.
Okay.
And thanks very much.
Thanks, fellas. It's good talking to you.
Okay.
Always a pleasure, Rick.
Now we have a question, as we usually do, from Peter Shelley in Bogota, Colombia, one of our other guest co-hosts.
Sure.
And, Ben, if you would take it away, it's dedicated to Tim.
Ah, yes. Alrighty, Tim, your time to shine. Our good co-host and questioner writes to us. You have worked on a number of books from UFO contactees. Do you have examples of any interesting, really obscure contactees that you could share, and a little description about them?
Oh my, gosh! I mean, there's all kinds of obscure contactees that have come and gone throughout history. And John Keel often referred to them as silent contactees because the majority of them never wanted the publicity that you had from people, say like George Damsky or Howard Menger. But I have worked with a few that they all made me promise that I'd never reveal their names, but I can tell their stories. There was one woman in particular that her case was always really interesting to me because it started out very much like as we were talking in just previously about UFOs. Her case started with what appeared to be a physical craft that landed in the field behind her house. Now this was a woman. She was married. She had several small children. No interest at all in UFOs, or no real knowledge of it either. Probably with the exception of maybe something that she had seen on television. But one evening, while the rest of her family was gone, this craft, and she described it as looking like a giant ball bearing. She was round and it was like it was covered in chrome, very shiny. She said it landed in the field behind her house, and she said that she saw. She wasn't going to go out and see what and investigate. So she was watching from her kitchen window. She saw a number of humanoid-looking figures, and she really couldn't tell what they looked like because she said that they were glowing. It was like they had a luminance inside of them that was coming out. She described it almost like as angels. And then they all got back into the craft, and it flew away. Well, that evening then, when she was in bed and her husband was with her, these things then appeared in her bedroom and, gathered around the bed. She says there was about 4 or 5 of them, and she said they were tall. They had like a long blonde hair. Some of them, she said, the hair, it varied from she said some of them were redheaded, there were brunettes, there was black hairs. She tried to wake her husband. He wouldn't wake up. And these things, these beings talked to her and told her that they were visiting from, and I can't remember offhand now, some other star system, and they told her where they were from, and that they were visiting a number of people across the world to leave a message about the fate of the planet. Let's see. Her story that they told her was that there was an upcoming ecological disaster, and that we needed to, put a stop to our polluting the planet and things like that. They disappeared. Husband had he never woke up for it. This happened, I guess, a number of times, but it was almost like it was a recording. At night, these things would appear. They would repeat the same message. And it happened, over and over again, she said. She said that was the bizarre thing about it. And then finally, she saw the craft appear again in the field, Same situation. Things got out, walked around, got back in the craft, it flew away, and she never had a repeat experience again. So what makes this story unique in a lot of the ones that I have looked into was the fact that it was almost like it was like a film or a DVD or something replaying itself every time these things would appear to her. And again, like a lot of the older contactee cases, it was always a message of planetary destruction. The older ones dealt more with nuclear disaster. Seems like the more modern cases deal with ecological disasters. And of course, these things never offered any, any advice on what she should do.
Right,
She
yeah.
was just, they just told her that we needed to change our ways. And in a lot of these cases, it's always the same thing. Nobody ever says, "Oh, well, here we've got this device we're going to leave with you that you push the button, and not only does it fix everything, but it fixes all the people who are all the corporations that are polluting and everything." But then after that, she never had another experience again, and it really was one of the strangest contactee cases that I ever investigated.
Thoughts, Ben?
It's funny. I brought up that same point, Tim, on a podcast I was on, because somehow we got talking about environmentalism, and the one of the hosts was talking about it, and he was saying like, oh well, it's like, the ETs come down and they're like, oh, we should really, you should really need to do something about the environment. And I was like, yeah, but they never tell you how. They never tell you what to do. They're just like, you gotta stop it, you silly human. And it doesn't really do anything, right? But that's a really interesting point too. The whole thing with nuclear war and, the 70s and 80s, maybe even the 60s too. But the funny thing is, arguably, I'd say there's been banter thrown around from various sources I've read that arguably we're much closer to nuclear war than we were during the Cold War.
Yeah, nobody's paying attention.
No, and
we were hiding under desks. Remember that, Tim?
Oh yes, duck and cover.
Yep.
Right, now we have mass media telling, oh, don't worry about it, it's fine. and it's like, but here's the thing, we have so many things that threaten to destroy us at all times, and if these very benevolent ETs care so much, they don't really do anything about it. And here's the thing, why don't they do anything about it? The argue, you hear people say, well, they care about humans and they want to see us progress, and they want us to do great. And I was like, okay, cool, then why aren't they doing anything? And it's like, and then the opposite side of the coin is, well, they don't really care, and we're just kind of there, and then why interact with us at all? What's the point? And so it's a big question mark as to why even bother with us at all. I always like Stanton Friedman's whole thing where we're sort of this race that's primary activity is tribal warfare. That's like what we've always done, and so it's like, why would they care, right? And so it's like, yeah, sure, they want to help us, they want to save us, and it's like, no, they just want to hurt us, they want to mess with us, and it's like, well, it doesn't. We like to make things so simple. And we like to simplify things. It's like the whole point of conspiracy theories isn't that, well, we know secret knowledge. It's to understand incredibly complex concepts and boil it down to one thing. When it's not one thing, it's so many other things that are happening all at the same time. And it's like you can't boil down all of this to, well, they want to help us, they want to save us, they want to hurt us, they want to experiment on us, we're in the middle of a cosmic war. Because the thing is, we don't really know.
Well, this kind of prefigures our show in 2 weeks with Preston Dennett on the abduction of Dolly, his latest book. And you have just stated, Ben, the precise theological argument about why doesn't God come in and make everything good?
Right.
Come in and save us. You could just substitute aliens or God in the same argument, which I find interesting.
Well, it's like being on a playground and you're climbing on the monkey bars, you fall, you hurt yourself. Like, well, I won't do that again. But now it's like, okay, well, now there's a bunch of styrofoam on the ground, and you can fall to your heart's content, and then you're fine. And
well, at the risk of being a spoiler here for that show, the common theological argument is that we are allowed to have free will and mess up as much as we want, and that's why God doesn't come in and solve everything. And then his subject in the book, Dolly, says that the aliens don't do that for precisely the same reason, that we have free will, and it's the whole thing right down the line. So, I mean, we'll have fun questioning her. Tim, maybe you want to get in on that show. I don't know. But
yeah, I've talked with Preston and Dolly, in fact.
Oh, have you? Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with her case.
Okay, well, why don't we get into, there's a question here from Roberta in Uxbridge, Mass., and we started on this question, but I wanted to get Tim's view on it, so I think it's worth stating it again.
Sure thing. Okie dokie. So
it's important.
So the question is, we love your show, Paul and Ben, our household words around here. But I now have grandchildren, and some of the paranormal subjects are pretty scary and negative. How do you talk to your children about these things? There are enough scary things in the world right now. How do we reassure them?
I think that's a good question. What say you, Tim?
Well, I suppose it's a matter of waiting till they actually ask questions about it. Depending on the age of the children, really popular media, TikTok, Instagram, things like that. I mean, is really full of videos with alleged ghosts and monsters and all that, and right from the very beginning. Say with my daughter, I mean she's 15, almost 16, and when we talked about things like that, I always told her, I said, there's a lot more going on, around us that we don't realize. But, and I just tell her, but, it's nothing to be afraid of. I said, it's not like there's never going to be a monster under your bed or in your closet. Never worry about things like that. I said that, you being afraid, your fears are probably a lot more worse than anything weird that's ever going to happen to you. I said, yeah, sometime you may see something, weird, something, some closet door may open, a can may move across the counter. I said, the most of the time, that's it. That's the worst it's going to be. So don't worry about it. Don't be afraid of it. And then, if she would come and ask me questions, then I would try to answer her as honestly as possible. And that's just it. You have to be open, not only with, paranormal or any subject. If a kid wants to know, don't try to, bury it under a cloud of pretty flowers and unicorns. Just, kids appreciate it when you're honest with them, but don't lay it on so thick that you scare the heck out of them. Honesty, I think, is just always the best policy when it comes to things like this.
Well, I certainly agree with that. Well, I remember a story about, which is true, because I heard him say it on the air, Mr. Rogers, someone I admired tremendously. And he was asked this question many times, being a child psychologist. And he said, and his answer was, when he was little and he was frightened, he'd see bad news on the television or disasters or plane crashes or whatever, his mother would say, look at all the people who are helping. And, the message being implied that there are far more good people and far more good things happening than there are bad things. And I think that's a real thing to consider. I remember when 9/11 occurred, in our house, Ben was 9, and he came back from school one day, that day, and he said, Dad, are they going to come to Woonsocket, meaning the terrorists? And I almost smiled a little. I said, Woonsocket is really not important enough to have that, in good. I think it's a great place. But, he wanted to be reassured, and naturally,
You still do.
Yeah, well, we all do. So I think it's really simple.
We all need a little reassurance sometimes.
Yeah, that there's far more good than there is evil in the world. Ben, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. You know, anxiety is really just the result of well, it really just comes from us, you know, and it's really just our desire for an immediate solution to things, and sometimes there just isn't, you know, and that's okay, right? And it's okay to be anxious about things, because it's, you know, there's no immediate result, and it's just reminding ourselves that, you know, sometimes stuff just happens.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with the paranormal. Sometimes stuff just happens, and it's like we only have the data points that we work with, and, you know, you hear something fall in you know, great example. My house is an old house and it creaks a lot, and occasionally
That's because your cats are too heavy.
Hey, you know, my cats are perfect. But you know, my wife is can get a little anxious sometimes. She's like, is there someone downstairs? And I'm like, well, no, you know, you just heard creaking. You know,
We won't mention the skunk.
no, we will not talk about that, because that is a different story for a different day. But that was really, you know, new homeowners. What can I say? And so, you know, it's like our anxieties and our fears, as you said very aptly, Tim, can be much worse than what's actually happening. And I really like that, because it's true. And it's like we hear something small or see something small, and then we build a story around it, and sometimes it's just something moved, you know, and that's about it.
Well, we might have time for one more question here, but Tim, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about your many books, your website, your tremendous history working with people like Tim Beckley, and so go ahead and tell us where people can find out more.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Right now, our most recent book is Sean Castile and I put this together. It's called Timothy Green Beckley's Bizarre Bazaar. And it's just a collection of some of Tim Beckley's favorite stories that he had in his personal files. He was wanting to put this book together before he passed away, and, you know, had some ideas of what he wanted to include, but unfortunately, you know, he did die before he could take it much further. So Sean Castile and I we took it upon ourselves to put this book out and get it printed, and it can be found on Amazon.com. Like all of the rest of my books, just type in Tim R. Swartz or Tim Beckley, and there'll be more than most people would want to deal with in a lifetime. But I encourage you to try, though. And my website is conspiracyjournal.com, and I always nowadays I kind of preface and say all the fun conspiracies and none of the political junk. And Sean and I are also we're currently working on a book called the working title is called Alien Artifacts, and it kind of deals with the somewhat with the metal debris and stuff possibly left by UFOs, but we're going to take it a step further. Physical things, and it's just it's going to be a fascinating book. I hope we have that finished and out by the end of the summer.
Okay, let's take a really quick one here from Lynn. I don't know where Lynn's from.
Okie dokie. So Lynn writes to us, I have seen, or I see you have a show coming up on Skinwalker Ranch. That's July 31st. I have seen the TV shows, and it's pretty interesting. But I have trouble believing what I see on TV. Do you believe this case, and what is your take on it?
Yeah, we're going to have James Keenan on from the show on July 31st. Tim, what say you about Skinwalker Ranch?
I do think that there is unusual activity taking place at that in that area, but if you go all across the planet, you will find other locations that have probably just as much, if not more, types of weird activity. I know you're talking about Ted Phillips. I mean, he looked into for many years the Marley Woods in Missouri, and recently we on another show I was on, we had a guest by the name of Trey Hudson, who had been investigating a place in the southeast that really, I mean, if you would take all the activity of that and move it over to Skinwalker Ranch, I mean, the cases would be indistinguishable. I wonder sometimes if you would go any place and just put up equipment in the middle of a wood someplace, if you wouldn't start recording paranormal activity that maybe just depending on the time of year or whatever, you would see interesting paranormal activity that would ebb and fall. That'd be an interesting experiment to try sometime, just to see if you could just go anywhere and see if paranormal activity would start up.
Well, don't look now, but we actually do that. But these are the flap areas that, as we call them. We're working on 6 right now, and it's overwhelming. And many of the same things that the Skinwalker Ranch. So, had we not seen it ourselves, we might have more trouble believing it. It's about Skinwalker Ranch. Excuse me. However, you have variations such as the Pukwudgie phenomenon in the Bridgewater Triangle right near us, where we are, or at least I've been quite frequently lately because of filming there on various documentaries. So, yeah, I believe it. I trust. We both know George Knapp. We've been on Coast to Coast with him. I think you have too, Tim.
Yes,
And we trust George. He's a real journalist. He's the best interviewer I ever worked with. And Colm Kelleher, I don't really know very well. And we'll see James Keenan. I know him through MUFON, the Experience of Resource team, and he's going to be on the show again in 2 weeks. I should say July 31st. So we'll find out more about it then. And but yeah, I have no problem believing it because I've seen it, in other places. So Ben, thoughts?
No, I tend to agree, and also we don't have a ton of time.
Yeah.
So I think it's worth exploring, and it's always kind of hard to sort of talk about something you've never seen or experienced, but you do your best, and that's why we have interviews.
Yeah.
That's why we talk to people.
Well, the interesting thing about it is well, as John Keel called them, window areas where all sorts of things would happen. And in our experience, these things are all happening, things that are not traditionally related to one another in our minds, UFOs and ghosts and things.
Right.
But they seem to be, in our minds, at least, are related because they involve quantum entanglement and the various overwashes and terms we had to invent for a multiverse phenomena, as we believe it is. Where things come and go, inhabitants come and go, there's interaction, and the energies are similar or the same.
Well, it's also not a new story either, right? Places can be many different things at the same time, and it's what our ancestors experienced, and it's what we continue to experience.
Yeah, these things have been going on forever. So there we have it. Okay, Tim, any final thought on that?
No, I think that was a fascinating question, and it's there have been locations all across the planet throughout history. I think you look at a place where there's like standing stones and other ancient monuments. Probably at one time that would be an area of high paranormal activity, like Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah. Well, you've been all over the world doing that, and I've been in stone circles in England and seen some pretty weird stuff. So. There you have it. More material for another show. Ben,
Yes.
Let's take away our announcements.
Sure thing. And if you're into Alien Crunch ice cream, Roswell burgers, spaceship chips, why don't they just call them space chips? Who knows? You're in luck, though. The Exeter UFO Festival returns in September at the historic Exeter, New Hampshire Town Hall over the Labor Day weekend. Remember, it is in September 3rd and 4th. This is a great event, and the whole town gets involved. It's sponsored by the Exeter Area Kiwanis Club to benefit local children's charities. Along with ourselves, speakers will include Kathleen Martin, Peter Robbins, Jennifer Stein, Bob Terrio, Mike Stevens, Lynn Nickerson, Valerie LaFaso, Mac Maloney, and 2 new faces, Shauna and Josh
La Jeunesse.
La Jeunesse. Sorry, no, I was running out of breath there.
You got to get that by September.
La Jeunesse, yes.
Yes, very elegant.
Yes, indeed. And the subject of our talk will be time storms, with thanks to the great British researcher Jenny Randles, who coined the term. We plan to do our traditional live broadcast from the event that's Sunday. That's on Sunday with a panel of the speakers. And this is a fun event, so you can join us. Visit it, ExeterUFOFestival.org for more details.
And visit our show website, BehindTheParanormal.com. You have all kinds of information and over 1,100 free shows recorded from 2008 on and different specials and all that. So you can.
So if you have 1,100 hours.
Get that if you do, yes. So we also have a charity page. Check that out. What's lurking in the closet for next week, Ben?
Well, next week we plan to shine the light on a fun subject. That's on June 19th. We'll welcome back Ray Hernandez of the Consciousness and Contact Research Institute for a journey into what the researchers have found and what's in their new 2,000-page, 4-volume book, A Greater Reality.
Yeah, something else. We leave you today with a rather sad thought from person or persons unknown. When I was a child, I was afraid of ghosts. As I grew up, I realized that people are far more scary. Anyway, I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno.
And I'm Tim Swartz. Thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we'll see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Local and live at 9.